In the cold corridors of Madrid's royal palace, beneath heavy velvet drapes and the flicker of golden candlelight, lived a princess whose life was nothing like the fairy tales. Isabel Maria of Habsburg carried a name that commanded Europe, yet within her fragile body lay a burden she had never chosen, a twisted spine, a constant reminder of a dynasty's relentless pursuit of power through blood. From the moment she was born, her destiny had been written for her. Every step she took, every gown draped over her shoulders, every stare she endured in court whispered the same truth: Isabel was not seen as a daughter, not even as a woman, but as a piece in the great chess game of kings and empires. At 17, the words she had long dreaded finally came from her father, King Philip IV. She was to marry her cousin, Archduke Leopold Charles of Austria. This union, they said, would secure Spain's place on the European stage. But Isabel knew the darker truth: such marriages, repeated for generations, had already cursed her family with deformities, weakness, and early deaths. Her own body was living proof of that legacy. Yet, this story is not only about a marriage arranged by politics. It is the story of a young woman bound by tradition yet daring to hope, a princess who found in her arranged husband not just duty, but an ally. Together, they would quietly question the very system that had shaped and scarred them, and in doing so, plant the fragile seed of defiance against a dynasty's fate. The bitter winds of February howled outside Madrid's royal palace, rattling the shutters and pressing against the ancient stone walls that had seen centuries of triumphs and sorrows. Within those walls, life seemed frozen, muffled by layers of velvet and protocol. And behind one tall arched window, Princess Isabel Maria of Habsburg, not yet 18, stood motionless, her pale hand resting on the cold glass. From her vantage point, the world beyond appeared distant, almost unreal. The palace gardens, once green and alive with fountains and laughter, were now buried under an endless veil of snow. White branches drooped under their icy burden, and the marble statues, half covered in frost, resembled mournful ghosts of a forgotten age. For Isabel, this frozen scene mirrored her own existence, beautiful on the surface, but suffocating, lifeless, sealed away. Her life had been scripted long before she drew her first breath. As the daughter of King Philip IV of Spain, she was a symbol of power, a vessel for alliances, and little else. Every lesson drilled into her by tutors had been designed not to free her mind, but to prepare her for obedience. Even her body, frail and bent by a severe curve in her spine, seemed to mock the destiny thrust upon her. At 17, she carried herself with grace, but each movement was heavy with pain. The thick corsets designed to force her posture upright cut into her skin, and the long gowns, weighted with jewels and embroidery, only deepened her suffering. Yet the court expected her to endure it all with a smile. They called it dignity. She knew it was survival. That morning, the silence of her chamber was broken by the soft rustle of skirts. Mercedes de Mendoza, her loyal lady-in-waiting, entered with a bow. The older woman had been by Isabel's side since childhood, a figure of gentle strength in a world that offered little kindness. "Your Highness," Mercedes said softly, her voice carrying a weight that Isabel recognized at once. "His Majesty requests your presence in the council chamber." Isabel turned her head slowly, her long chestnut hair brushing against the fur collar of her robe. "Now. Did he say what matter this concerns?" "No, Your Highness," Mercedes replied, avoiding her gaze. "Only that it is of utmost importance to the crown." A faint sigh escaped Isabel's lips. She knew too well what such sudden summons meant. The king did not call for her out of affection. Each meeting brought announcements that altered the course of her life without her consent. Decisions made not for her happiness, but for Spain's survival. With Mercedes's help, she prepared for the audience. Servants tightened the custom corset around her fragile body. It was supposed to straighten her spine, yet it had never done more than bruise her ribs and leave her breathless. Over it, they draped an elaborate gown of midnight blue velvet, the fabric heavy with gold embroidery and encrusted with pearls. The gown was a masterpiece of Spanish artisanship, but its true purpose was to mask her deformity. As her maids arranged her hair into intricate braids, Isabel gazed into the silver mirror. Her reflection was a cruel paradox. Her face carried the beauty of her dynasty, porcelain skin, dark lashes framing deep blue eyes, lips shaped delicately like those in old portraits. She might have been flawless, had the mirror ended at her shoulders. But below, the uneven line of her back betrayed her, twisting her silhouette into something court physicians whispered about in private. They called it the Habsburg curse. Legends within the palace said it was the price of the dynasty's obsession with itself, generation after generation marrying cousins and uncles and nieces to keep their power intact. Isabel did not need to believe in curses, her body itself was proof enough. At last, the chief maid placed a delicate diadem on her head, pearls gleaming like drops of frozen dew. "Are you ready, Highness?" she asked. "Ready," Isabel whispered, though her heart resisted. The long walk through the palace corridors felt endless. Courtiers bowed as she passed, their expressions carefully schooled into politeness. Yet Isabel felt the weight of their stares, pity in some eyes, disgust in others. From childhood she had been trained to ignore such looks, to wear the dignity of her rank as armor against the cruelty no one dared speak aloud. The heavy oak doors of the council chamber creaked open. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, scented with incense and wax. Her father, King Philip IV, sat upon his gilded throne, stern and regal in black velvet. At his side stood the Count Duke of Olivares, the king's most trusted minister, his calculating gaze sweeping the room like a blade. "Come closer, my daughter," the king commanded. His voice carried both authority and an undertone of tenderness, though Isabel knew it was the kind of affection reserved for duty, not for love. She advanced with her head held high, though each step sent sharp aches down her spine. When she bowed, her body screamed in protest. "Majesty! Father! I come at your command." The king studied her, his expression unreadable, caught between concern for his child and the cold pragmatism of a ruler. Finally, he spoke the words Isabel had dreaded yet expected. "Isabel, after long negotiations and much thought, your marriage has been arranged. You will wed your cousin, Archduke Leopold Charles of Austria, son of my brother, the Emperor Ferdinand." The chamber fell silent. Isabel's pulse hammered in her ears, yet her face betrayed nothing. She had always known this day would come. Still, she had hoped, foolishly, that her condition might spare her, that her bent spine might be seen as a reason to set her aside. But the Habsburgs did not abandon their pawns, however flawed. The king's words were final: this marriage would strengthen the bond between Spain and the empire. For the dynasty, for Europe, for history. No one mentioned the other truth. The one Isabel carried in her very bones. That the same marriages binding empires together had sown weakness and deformity into the family's blood. Her father knew it. The physicians knew it. And she, most of all, lived it. She forced herself to ask calmly, "When must I leave for Vienna, father?" "You shall not go to Vienna," the king replied. "The Archduke will come here, to Madrid. In 3 months' time, the wedding will be celebrated in our court. Afterward, you and your husband will establish your household in the Low Countries. He will govern in our name." Isabel lowered her eyes, hiding the storm within. She had been raised to obey, to place the needs of the crown above her own. And yet, bitterness swelled in her chest. The very tradition that had twisted her body would now continue through her children. She was not alone in her suffering. Her entire dynasty bore the scars. And yet, the cycle would go on. The door creaked, and Mercedes entered quietly, kneeling beside her. "Highness, you must prepare for tonight's dinner. The imperial ambassador will attend, and His Majesty insists on your presence." Isabel wiped her tears, nodding. Duty did not wait for grief. "Mercedes," she asked softly as they rose, "what do you know of my betrothed?" Mercedes hesitated. "Only that he is cultured, fond of music and learning. But it is also said, that he bears the Habsburg jaw." A bitter smile curved Isabel's lips. "So he too carried the mark." Perhaps, she thought, she would not bear this burden alone. The heavy oak doors creaked open, and Isabel stepped into the council chamber. The air inside was heavy, not from the winter chill but from the weight of decisions made in this room, decisions that shaped nations and crushed individuals beneath their grandeur. Her father, King Philip IV of Spain, sat enthroned beneath a canopy of crimson and gold. He was a man hardened by years of war and endless negotiations, his face carved with the lines of duty and exhaustion. To his right stood the Count Duke of Olivares, the king's most powerful minister. His dark eyes missed nothing, his influence stretched across Spain like an invisible net. Around them gathered the king's counselors, men in silks and furs, whispering among themselves, their gazes fixed on the frail figure approaching the throne. "Come closer, my daughter," the king commanded, his voice echoing through the chamber. Isabel moved forward, her steps measured, each one betraying the stiffness of her body beneath the layers of velvet. She bowed as deeply as she could manage, the pain sharp and immediate, but her voice steady. "Majesty. Father. I am here at your call." Philip's eyes softened for a moment as he regarded her. Yet the softness was fleeting. Kings could not afford tenderness, not even toward their children. "Isabel," he began, after long negotiations, "your marriage has been arranged." The words fell with the finality of a bell tolling in a cathedral. Isabel's heart raced, though her face remained composed. She had expected this. Every Habsburg child knew from birth that their lives belonged not to themselves but to the dynasty. And yet, a part of her had prayed, perhaps her deformity might spare her, might render her unsuitable for the cruel game of alliances. But her father's eyes told her otherwise. "You will wed your cousin, Archduke Leopold Charles of Austria, son of my brother, the Emperor Ferdinand," the king declared. "This union will bind our bloodlines more tightly and secure our influence within the empire." For a moment, Isabel felt the air leave her lungs. The Archduke. Her cousin. She had never met him, yet his reputation, like his jaw, preceded him. It was said he was well educated, fond of music and mathematics. But whispers also spoke of weakness, of bouts of melancholy, of the infamous Habsburg jaw carved deep into his features. Olivares stepped forward, bowing slightly, his voice smooth and practiced. "Your Highness, the Archduke is a man of great worth, educated in the finest universities of the empire. He will understand your particular circumstances." Particular circumstances. The phrase struck Isabel like a knife. It was the court's polite way of avoiding the truth, her twisted spine, her fragile frame, the visible evidence of what generations of intermarriage had wrought. "When must I leave for Vienna, father?" she asked quietly, forcing herself to sound calm. "You shall not go to Vienna," the king replied. "The Archduke will come here. The wedding will take place in Madrid in 3 months. Afterward, you will accompany him to the Low Countries, where he will govern in our name." Isabel bowed her head, her face an impassive mask. Inside, bitterness swelled. She had been raised to obey, to place the needs of the crown above her own, but obedience did not quiet the storm in her heart. The very tradition that had bent her body would now continue through her children. The audience ended as quickly as it had begun. The king turned to his counselors, dismissing her with a nod, already absorbed again in the affairs of state. She left the chamber in silence, the echo of her father's decree clanging in her ears. That evening, Isabel retreated to the oratory, a small chapel tucked within the palace walls. Alone, she struggled to kneel before the altar, her body aching with the effort. Flickering candles cast shadows across the crucifix as tears welled in her eyes. "Why must this continue, Lord?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Do you not see the suffering it brings?" She remembered overhearing physicians' whispers when they thought she wasn't listening. They spoke of her curved spine as the result of generations of inbreeding. Of cousins with jaws so protruded they could barely close their mouths. Of uncles plagued by weakness and melancholy. Of infants who did not live past their first months. Her own brother, the heir to Spain, had died in childhood, the doctors quietly blaming congenital illness. Her father himself suffered bouts of frailty and dark moods. She was not alone. She was part of a family tree rotting from within, and yet the branches kept weaving together, tighter and tighter, until collapse seemed inevitable. The creak of the door pulled her from her prayer. Mercedes entered quietly, kneeling beside her. The woman's presence had always been a balm against Isabel's loneliness. "Highness," Mercedes said softly, "you must prepare for tonight's banquet. The imperial ambassador will attend. His Majesty insists on your presence." Duty never waited. Isabel wiped her tears, composing herself. As Mercedes helped her rise, Isabel asked, "Tell me, what do you know of my betrothed?" Mercedes hesitated before replying, "I have heard he is cultured, fond of music and the arts. But it is also said," she paused, lowering her voice, "he bears the prominent Habsburg jaw." A bitter smile curved Isabel's lips. "Then at least I will not suffer alone," she murmured. That night, the palace blazed with light. The great banquet hall overflowed with nobles, their voices a constant hum of gossip and praise. Isabel sat at the high table, her gown glittering under chandeliers, her back aching beneath the corset. Courtiers tried not to stare at her too openly, yet their glances were sharp, heavy with unspoken words. The imperial ambassador, a corpulent man whose hooked nose and drooping jaw bore the same family mark, gave her a sympathetic glance. Isabel met his eyes only briefly, then turned away, unwilling to accept pity. The evening passed in a haze of speeches lauding the alliance. They spoke endlessly of the Archduke's education, his virtues, his loyalty. Not once did anyone mention what Isabel and every physician in Europe already knew, that such unions weakened bloodlines, that they risked deformities in children yet unborn. Isabel sat silently, her face composed, her heart heavy. Inwardly, she made a vow. If she could not escape her fate, then she would bend it. She would seek knowledge, allies among physicians and scholars. She would learn all she could about consanguinity, about the inheritance of traits. And perhaps, when the moment was right, she would persuade the crown, her father, her future husband, that new alliances, beyond the suffocating circle of Habsburg blood, were not only wise but necessary. That night, as the banquet ended and the palace fell into silence once more, Isabel lay awake in her chamber. Snow still fell over Madrid, cloaking the city in white. Yet beneath that silence, she carried a fragile spark of hope. For the first time, she dared to believe she might not simply be a pawn. The following morning dawned pale and heavy with mist, yet inside Isabel's chamber the air was tense with preparations. 3 months had been declared, 3 months until she would stand as a bride not of her own choosing, but of the Dynasty's. The news spread quickly through Madrid, rippling outward across Europe like a stone dropped in still water. Ambassadors wrote dispatches, courtiers whispered behind closed doors, and noble families speculated about the union of Spain and Austria. For Isabel, the days that followed were filled with endless rituals of display. Seamstresses paraded through her rooms with bolts of silk, tailors measured and remeasured, jewelers presented glittering ornaments heavy enough to weigh down even the strongest neck. Every item was chosen not to celebrate her, but to disguise her. The gowns were engineered with capes and layers of embroidery designed to mask the bend of her spine, as though fabric could erase truth. Her ladies-in-waiting, especially young Catalina, marveled at each piece. "It is magnificent, Your Highness," Catalina would say, her eyes wide as she smoothed the golden thread. Isabel would smile politely, though the smile never reached her eyes. She had learned to wear that mask long ago. One afternoon, as her attendants withdrew, the royal physician Don Francisco de Ovado entered. He was an older man with wise, weary eyes, summoned each week to examine her condition. Isabel submitted herself as always, sitting on the specially crafted stool as he studied the curve of her spine with careful hands. "How do you feel today, Highness?" he asked gently. "The pain is constant," Isabel answered, her tone steady, almost rehearsed. "But I fear more for the ceremony itself. Hours of standing will worsen it. The physician nodded gravely, his fingers tracing the distorted vertebrae. The progression is slow, but it continues. For the wedding, we will strengthen your corset and arrange moments for you to rest, though the strain will be heavy. Isabel hesitated. For weeks, a question had haunted her, one too dangerous to voice. Yet now, with the physician's hand upon her back, she forced the words out. Don Francisco, speak honestly with me. If I wed my cousin, what are the chances my children will inherit this deformity, or worse? The physician froze, his eyes narrowing. He glanced toward the door, then lowered his voice. Highness, it is a matter rarely spoken aloud. Medicine has much yet to learn, but observations across families suggest, when close kin marry, certain peculiarities appear more often in their children. Peculiarities, Isabel repeated bitterly. A delicate word for suffering. The physician sighed. I have seen it in other noble houses. Weakness of health, deformities, stillbirths. Some scholars in Salamanca have begun to study these patterns. Quietly, of course. Their conclusion is, families must seek new blood to restore strength. Yet such advice is ignored by those who cling to tradition. Silence pressed upon the chamber. Isabel's heart pounded as his words sank in. She had always suspected it, had heard whispers, but to hear it confirmed by a physician gave it the sharpness of truth. Your honesty is a gift, Don Francisco, she said at last, her voice firm. But this conversation must remain between us. He bowed deeply. Of course, Highness. My discretion is absolute. When he departed, Isabel remained seated, staring into the carved wood of the chamber walls. She was a princess raised for obedience, yet her mind raced with questions she dared not voice to anyone else. Was she condemned to pass this burden to her children? Was her marriage nothing more than the continuation of a curse? That evening, Mercedes entered with a look of urgency. Highness, she said, her voice low. News has come. The Archduke has arrived in Madrid. His procession entered the city this afternoon. Isabel's breath caught. Months of anticipation, of speculation, had ended. Tomorrow she would meet him face to face, the man who would share not only her bed, but the same flawed blood. That night, she attended the welcoming banquet, though she remained hidden behind a lattice screen. The hall glittered with chandeliers, filled with nobles straining to glimpse the imperial guests. Trumpets announced their entrance, and all eyes turned to the Archduke. Leopold Charles was tall and slender, his hair pale gold under candlelight. From a distance, Isabel studied him closely, searching for signs of the legacy they both shared. His bearing was regal, his movements deliberate. Yet she noticed it, the slight tilt of his head, the way he seemed to angle his face, as if to conceal the protrusion of his jaw. The mark of their dynasty. Highness, Mercedes whispered beside her, what do you think of him? Isabel's lips pressed together. He seems formal, she murmured. It was the only word she could summon. He was a stranger, yet he would define the rest of her life. As the banquet continued, Isabel's father conversed warmly with Leopold Charles, their laughter echoing through the hall. Courtiers leaned forward with curiosity, eager for favor with the imperial guests. Foreign ambassadors scribbled in their notebooks. And Isabel, concealed behind the lattice, watched it all with a heart heavy as lead. Later, when the music faded and the guests dispersed, Isabel returned to her chamber. Sleep eluded her. Tomorrow, she would meet him not as a distant figure, but as her betrothed. The thought filled her not with joy, but with dread. The next morning dawned bright and clear, as though the heavens themselves sought to bless the union of Spain and Austria. Isabel endured hours of preparation, her hair perfumed and braided, her face powdered, her gown of blue and silver fastened with merciless tightness. The corset cut into her skin until she could scarcely breathe, yet she bore it with stoic resolve. You are radiant, Highness, Mercedes said gently, her voice filled with admiration. Radiant, Isabel echoed faintly, though she felt none of it. At last, the appointed hour arrived. The throne hall glittered with banners of gold and crimson. Courtiers lined the walls, their gazes fixed upon the young princess who entered slowly, each step deliberate, back straightened as best the corset allowed. King Philip rose from his throne, his voice booming across the chamber. "My daughter, it is my honor to present your future husband, our beloved nephew, His Imperial Highness, Archduke Leopold Charles of Austria." The opposite doors opened. Leopold Charles strode forward with regal composure, his fair hair gleaming, his eyes an unmistakable shade of blue. And there, carved into his face, was the infamous Habsburg jaw, jutting forward as though mocking the grandeur of his attire. He bowed to the king, then rose and let his gaze fall upon Isabel. For the first time, their eyes met. Isabel braced herself for pity, for revulsion. Instead, she saw something else entirely: recognition. A quiet acknowledgement of the burden they both carried. "It is an honor to meet you at last, cousin," Leopold Charles said, his voice warm, touched by a German accent. He took her hand and kissed it lightly. "The honor is mine, cousin," Isabel replied, her voice steady though her heart fluttered. Isabel blinked, startled. What secrets could he hold? What truths could possibly be more dangerous than those they already lived? For the first time since her father had sealed her fate, Isabel felt not only dread, but a flicker of intrigue. The throne hall still echoed in Isabel's mind as she returned to her chambers. The necklace of sapphires and diamonds lay heavy against her collarbone, less a gift than a chain. It marked her future as sealed, yet in the Archduke's eyes she had glimpsed something unexpected. Not pity, not disdain, but recognition. A silent confession that he, too, carried the weight of their bloodline. That evening's banquet glowed with pomp. Isabel, dressed in silver and blue, sat at the high table beside Leopold Charles. Courtiers whispered about his manners, his education, and carefully avoided mentioning his jutting jaw. One bishop raised a goblet and declared their marriage a beacon for the glory of Spain and Austria. Applause thundered, while Isabel's smile remained still, her hands tightening in her lap. Leopold leaned toward her when the orchestra played loud enough to shield their words. "You endured today with great grace, cousin. I know the pain it cost you." The candor startled her. No one ever spoke of her deformity so plainly. "Your candor surprises me," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Why hide it? My jaw is as plain as your back. We bear the same scars. In Vienna, I studied with physicians. Their treatises speak of inheritance, of what repeated unions among kin create. Peculiarities, they call them. But we know better." They paused in the palace gardens, the fountain masking their voices. Isabel dared to ask, "And still you consent to this marriage? You do not fear for our children?" His eyes darkened. "I fear it deeply. But Spain demands it. The Empire demands it. Our wishes mean nothing beside the crown. Yet," his voice lowered, "knowledge may yet help us. Some physicians seek ways to strengthen frail children. If we bring such men to our court, perhaps we can change what tradition refuses to." For the first time since her father's decree, Isabel felt hope stir. Perhaps this marriage was not a prison, but a fragile alliance against fate. The weeks that followed swept her into a storm of preparation. Madrid streets filled with rumor and anticipation, while inside the palace tailors worked without rest, embroiderers sewed pearls and diamonds into her gowns, and musicians rehearsed hymns. Isabel moved through it all like a shadow, dutiful, silent, enduring. Each fitting corset was tighter than the last, each jewel heavier, each step a reminder of the price she paid for appearances. Not all welcomed the union. Whispered doubts crept through the council. Some advisers feared that joining two fragile branches of the family might imperil succession. The French ambassador even urged Spain to seek new blood. But King Philip silenced them. The wedding would proceed, and any who doubted it opposed the crown. When Mercedes relayed these whispers, Isabel's lips tightened. For centuries they have praised these marriages. Only now, when the consequences stand before them, do they hesitate. Still, she clung to Leopold's words by the fountain. There might yet be a way to bend destiny. The morning of the wedding dawned cloudless, bells pealing across Madrid as crowds filled the streets. In her chamber, Isabel endured the lacing of a corset designed to force her spine straighter than nature allowed. Each pull crushed her ribs until she gasped. "Tighter," she commanded. "Highness, it will bring unbearable pain," Mercedes pleaded. "The pain is already mine," Isabel answered calmly. "Today it will serve a purpose." At last she stood before the mirror. Her gown of white silk and silver brocade shimmered in folds that hid her bent frame. A cape of pearls draped her shoulders, a crown of orange blossoms rested upon her brow. To the world, she looked the perfect bride. Only her eyes betrayed the cost. The cathedral ceremony was magnificent. Bishops intoned blessings beneath stained glass that showered the floor with colored light. Isabel walked the aisle on her father's arm, every step a silent battle, yet her face serene. Leopold Charles awaited at the altar, regal in Austrian garb, his jaw unmistakable yet his gaze steady. When their hands joined, Isabel felt the faint tremor of his fingers. "I, Leopold Charles of Habsburg, take you Isabel Maria as my rightful wife," he declared firmly. When her turn came, Isabel spoke with quiet conviction. Her voice carried not resignation, but resolve. For the first time, she sensed that together, they might resist tradition's cruelest chains. At the banquet, as music thundered and courtiers gossiped, Leopold slipped a vial into her hand. "Laudanum," he whispered. "A few drops will ease the pain. My physician prepares it for me." The gesture was small, but it pierced the wall around Isabel's heart. In a world that saw her only as a pawn, Leopold had offered something else, an act of kindness, and perhaps the beginning of trust. The grandeur of the cathedral still echoed in Isabel's ears long after the vows had been spoken. Trumpets, hymns, and applause had carried her through the day like a current too strong to resist. Yet when night fell, silence descended upon the palace, and Isabel was left to face the truth that no ceremony could disguise. She was now a wife, bound not only by faith and law but by the dynasty's relentless will. The banquet had ended with music and endless toasts. Courtiers whispered behind jeweled fans, foreign ambassadors exchanged cautious remarks about succession, and every eye measured Isabel's worth not by her face or voice, but by the promise of heirs. When at last the festivities subsided, tradition demanded the new couple retire to their chamber. Isabel's maids guided her into the bridal room, a great bedchamber draped in silk and candlelight. There, as custom dictated, noblewomen stripped away her finery. The corset came off first. When the last cord was pulled free, Isabel could not suppress a cry of relief. Her body sagged, trembling, freed from the prison that had bound her all day. A simple silk gown was placed upon her, far plainer than the glittering robe she had worn in the cathedral. "The Archduke will soon join you," intoned the Duchess of Medina Sidonia, her voice solemn. "Remember, Highness, your duty is to the dynasty and the crown." The words fell like chains across Isabel's shoulders. She inclined her head, knowing resistance was impossible. When the chamber emptied, she sat alone on the canopied bed, the flickering candlelight dancing across carved wooden beams. Her body ached from hours of restraint, but it was not pain that gripped her now. It was fear. Would Leopold recoil at her deformity? Would he pity her, despise her, or turn away in disgust when he saw her as she truly was, without jewels, without gowns to mask her twisted spine? The door opened softly. Leopold Charles entered, dismissing his attendants. He wore only a simple robe, his golden hair unbound, his expression calm. He bowed slightly. "Good evening, wife." Isabel steadied her voice. "Good evening, husband." To her astonishment, he did not stride toward the bed with the entitlement of a prince. Instead, he approached slowly and knelt before her. She stared, uncertain. "Before we fulfill what is expected of us tonight," he said gently, "I wish to make a vow greater than the one we spoke in the cathedral." Isabel's heart pounded. He took her hand, his blue eyes unwavering. I swear to you, Isabel Maria, that I will always treat you with respect and dignity. I will never see your condition as shameful. For I too carry the mark of our bloodline. And I vow that together we will do everything in our power to give our children, should God bless us with them, the best chance to live healthy lives. For a moment Isabel could not speak. Tears welled in her eyes. In a world where marriages were transactions of power, his words were a gift she had never imagined. I accept your vow, she whispered at last, her voice trembling. And I swear to you loyalty, understanding, and companionship through all trials. Leopold rose and brushed her tears away with surprising tenderness. Then let us begin our marriage not as pawns of politics, but as allies against the fate written for us. That night, they performed the duty expected of them. Yet beneath the weight of tradition, something fragile took root. Not passion, not yet love, but mutual respect. And in that respect lay the seed of something that might one day grow stronger than duty. 5 years passed. The palace of Koudenberg in Brussels gleamed under the Flemish sun, its gardens bright with tulips and roses. Isabel, now 22, gazed out at them from her chamber window. Her beauty had deepened with age, her features refined by grace and resilience. Yet the curve of her back had worsened, her pain a constant shadow. She had learned to endure it, to live beyond it, refusing to let it define her. Her days were filled with duties as Archduchess, yet she carved out a quiet mission for herself. Together with Leopold, she transformed their court into a haven for thinkers, scholars, and physicians too daring for Madrid or Vienna. Among them was Jan Baptist van Helmont, a brilliant Flemish physician and alchemist. Exiled for his bold ideas, he now found patronage under Isabel's protection. He arrived one afternoon carrying a thick manuscript. Bowing deeply, he said, "Highness, my latest findings." He laid the manuscript before her, its pages filled with family trees, notes, and sketches. I have studied noble families across Flanders and Brabant. Like yours, they have married kin for generations. The patterns are undeniable, deformities, weakness, infertility, all increasing with each generation. Isabel traced the diagrams with her fingers, her face solemn. And have you found a cure? Van Helmont sighed. For the future, the answer is clear, new blood. But for those already marked, we can only ease the symptoms, never undo them. His words were a confirmation of what she already feared. Your candor is valued, doctor, she said firmly. Your work may yet change Europe, even if few are ready to hear it. He bowed again, then offered a small flask. A balm from Eastern herbs and Arab medicine. It may soothe your pain. She accepted it gratefully. Soon after, Leopold entered, his presence filling the chamber with warmth. At 28, he was still striking despite his jaw, his intellect and charisma shining brighter than his physical flaw. My dearest, he said, embracing her carefully. I bring news. In Amsterdam, I met a physician named Borhave. A visionary. He has agreed to join our court. Isabel's face lit with delight. Their Brussels court had become a sanctuary for knowledge, a quiet rebellion against tradition. Yet a shadow still loomed. A letter from Madrid arrived, Isabel said softly. My father grows impatient. After 5 years, we have no heir. Leopold took her hands, his smile tinged with sorrow. It is not for lack of trying. Perhaps nature itself resists the union of blood too alike. She looked down, her heart heavy. Their physicians had hinted as much. Their infertility might be the cruelest legacy of all. And now Madrid demanded answers. Old remedies and superstitions threatened to pull her back into a world where prayer and potions mattered more than truth. Leopold's voice was steady but resolute. Perhaps it is time we act boldly. We have gathered evidence. We could present it, urge the rulers of Europe to end these marriages of kin, to seek new alliances. If we succeed, We may save not only ourselves, but the very future of our house. Isabel's breath caught. To defy centuries of policy was to risk exile, perhaps worse. Yet she felt the pull of his vision. For the first time, rebellion did not seem like treachery. It seemed like survival. At that moment, the door opened and Mercedes entered, her face troubled. "Highnesses, the Spanish ambassador waits. He bears an urgent message from King Philip." Isabel and Leopold exchanged a glance. They knew whatever came next would decide more than their marriage. It might decide the fate of the entire Habsburg line. 5 years had passed since the night Isabel and Leopold exchanged their private vows in the flicker of candlelight. The world beyond their chamber had moved on, with wars, treaties, and shifting borders, but within the walls of Coudenberg Palace in Brussels, the echoes of their promise still lingered. They had not become a love story sung by poets, nor had they been reduced to the cold calculation of politics alone. Instead, they had carved something in between, a partnership built on mutual respect, intellect, and the fragile hope of breaking free from tradition's iron chains. Isabel, now 22, had matured into a woman of striking presence. Her face bore the pale beauty of the Habsburg line, her deep blue eyes sharpened by resolve. Yet her spine, bent since childhood, had grown worse, forcing her into constant pain. She had learned to manage it with dignity, never allowing courtiers to see her falter. Pain had become her silent companion, but not her master. Leopold, at 28, carried his own visible mark of their bloodline, the unmistakable jut of his jaw. But where others saw deformity, Isabel had come to see something else, resilience, even stubbornness. He was still striking in his way, and his presence commanded respect. In the Low Countries, he governed with competence, and together they built a court unlike any other in Europe. Coudenberg became a sanctuary for scholars, physicians, and thinkers cast out of more rigid courts. Their halls buzzed not only with politics, but with inquiry, an invisible rebellion against centuries of superstition. Among their circle was Jan Baptist van Helmont, the Flemish physician and alchemist whose daring ideas had once earned him exile. One spring afternoon, van Helmont arrived bearing a heavy manuscript. Isabel received him in her chamber, sunlight streaming through tall windows onto carved oak panels. He bowed deeply before presenting his work. "Highness," he said, placing the thick pages upon her desk, "these are my findings. I have traced noble families across Flanders and Brabant, families who, like your own, have intermarried for generations. The patterns are undeniable." Isabel flipped through the pages, her slender fingers brushing diagrams of family trees, lists of names, and sketches of deformed skeletons. Her chest tightened as she read the notes: twisted jaws, fragile limbs, children who never survived infancy. "And what conclusion do you draw, doctor?" she asked, though she already knew. "That new blood is the only cure," van Helmont said gravely. "For those already marked, we can only ease symptoms. We cannot erase what has been written in the body." Isabel lowered her gaze, her heart heavy. She had heard these words before, whispered by physicians in Madrid. Yet to see them mapped so clearly, so scientifically, was both terrifying and strangely liberating. "Your honesty is valued," she told him. "Even if few in power wish to hear it." Van Helmont bowed again and offered a small flask. "A balm of Eastern herbs. It may soothe your pain, if only a little." Isabel accepted it with quiet gratitude. Moments later, Leopold entered, his footsteps brisk but his expression warm. "My dearest," he said, taking her hand, "I bring news from Amsterdam. I have met a physician named Boerhaave, a visionary mind. He has agreed to join our circle here." Isabel's face lit with a rare smile. "Another ally. Our court grows stronger." Indeed, Coudenberg had become more than a seat of governance. It was a haven for inquiry, a place where ideas too dangerous for Madrid or Vienna found shelter. Physicians discussed theories of inheritance, alchemists experimented with remedies, scholars questioned the very foundations of dynastic policy. For Isabel and Leopold, it was a quiet rebellion, an attempt to build a future where knowledge, not superstition, shaped destiny. But one shadow remained. Despite 5 years of marriage, they had no heir. The question loomed larger with each passing season. Isabel felt it in the cautious glances of her ladies, in the whispers that lingered after Mass, in the letters from Madrid. One evening, as the sun set over the gardens, Isabel held a letter bearing the royal seal. Her hands trembled as she read aloud to Leopold. "My father grows impatient," she said softly. "After 5 years, the council presses him for an heir. They whisper of remedies, even of sending me back to Madrid for treatments." Leopold's jaw tightened. "Treatments," he repeated bitterly. "Superstition and prayers. They would put you through torment, knowing it would change nothing." "Perhaps nature itself resists," Isabel whispered, her eyes clouding. "Perhaps the bloodline will not bear fruit when it marries too close upon itself." They fell into silence. Their physicians had hinted as much, speaking delicately of infertility among families who repeated the same unions. It was the cruelest legacy of all, that their bodies, bound by blood, might not be able to give life. Leopold took her hands firmly. "Then perhaps it is time we act boldly. We have gathered knowledge, evidence. We could present it. Urge Europe's rulers to end these marriages of kin. To seek new blood, for the survival of every dynasty." Isabel's breath caught. To speak such words aloud is to invite exile. Or worse. "Perhaps," Leopold admitted. "But if we succeed, we may save not only ourselves, but generations to come." She studied his face, the determination in his eyes. Fear warred with hope inside her, yet she knew he was right. Silence would doom them. Knowledge, dangerous though it was, might be their only salvation. At that moment, the chamber doors opened. Mercedes entered, her expression troubled. "Highnesses," she said, bowing, "the Spanish ambassador waits. He bears an urgent message from King Philip." Isabel and Leopold exchanged a long glance. They understood at once. The letter, the whispers, the council's impatience, all had led to this. Whatever message awaited them now would not simply concern their marriage. It might decide the fate of their entire house. Isabel straightened, despite the ache in her spine. "Bring him in," she commanded. The candles flickered in the draught as Mercedes hurried away. Isabel and Leopold stood side by side, united not only by blood and politics, but by a fragile alliance they had forged themselves. In the distance, bells tolled across Brussels, their echoes mingling with the rustle of spring leaves. For Isabel, the sound was both ominous and clarifying. Whatever news the ambassador brought, it would mark the next chapter in their struggle, not just as husband and wife, but as two heirs trying to rewrite the destiny of a dynasty. The Spanish ambassador stood rigidly in the audience hall of Coudenberg Palace, his black cloak heavy with travel dust, his expression grave. Isabel and Leopold faced him side by side, the unopened letter now lying on the table between them, its red wax seal broken but its message echoing like a thunderclap. "His Majesty, King Philip, commands that the matter of succession be addressed without further delay," the ambassador announced. His voice carried the weight of Madrid itself. "It has been 5 years since your union, yet no heir has been produced. The council grows restless. They speak of remedies, of physicians in Madrid who may intervene." Isabel's stomach tightened. Remedies. She knew too well what that meant. Superstitious potions, endless prayers, invasive treatments whispered of by old midwives, each more humiliating than the last. Remedies that ignored the truth her body already knew. Leopold's voice broke the silence. "Tell His Majesty that we have sought every honorable path. But if nature resists, no superstition will prevail." His tone was firm, yet Isabel caught the tension beneath. The ambassador's gaze shifted to her. "Your Highness," he said more softly, "His Majesty commands obedience. The crown cannot endure uncertainty. For a moment, Isabel felt the full weight of her father's will pressing across the distance from Madrid. She had known since childhood that she was a pawn in his game, but never had she felt so trapped between duty and despair. When the ambassador departed, silence filled the chamber. Isabel sat slowly, her body aching, her mind racing. Leopold paced the room, his jaw tight, the candlelight casting sharp shadows across his features. "We cannot endure this forever," he muttered. "Sooner or later, Madrid will send for us. And if we refuse, they will strip us of authority, or worse." Isabel looked at him steadily. "Then perhaps we must act first. Perhaps we must show them the truth." Leopold stopped, his eyes narrowing. "You mean to speak openly? To reveal what we know of the bloodline?" She nodded. Van Helmont's studies, Borjave's notes, even Don Francisco's warnings from Madrid. All point to the same conclusion. Generations of kin marrying kin have sown weakness into our veins. The council fears it, though they will not say it. Perhaps if we speak plainly, if we urge them to seek new alliances, they cannot ignore it. Leopold's breath caught. He ran a hand across his face, torn between fear and resolve. It would be an act of defiance. They would call it betrayal of tradition. Perhaps even heresy. Or perhaps, Isabel said softly, it will be remembered as the moment the dynasty saved itself. Days turned into weeks. Letters from Madrid grew sharper, demanding urgency. Rumors spread through Brussels, reaching even the markets, that the Archduchess was barren, that the marriage was cursed, that the Low Countries might fall into disfavor. Isabel bore the whispers with calm dignity, but inside, each rumor cut deep. One evening, she met privately with Van Helmont and Borjave in a candlelit study. The men spread their manuscripts across the table, pages filled with diagrams of noble lineages, lists of afflictions, and observations from across Europe. "It is undeniable," Borjave said. "The closer the kinship, the greater the defects. This is not divine punishment, but a pattern of nature." Isabel traced a trembling finger across one of the diagrams, the twisted jaw of an infant sketched in careful ink. She whispered, "My family calls it God's will. But it is our own doing." Van Helmont leaned forward. "Highness, if you speak this truth to the world, you may change history. But you will also provoke fury. Are you prepared for that?" Isabel lifted her head, her deep blue eyes steady. "I was born into pain. If my suffering can spare others, then let fury come." At last, the moment arrived. In the great hall of Coudenberg, before Spanish envoys, Flemish nobles, and imperial representatives, Isabel and Leopold presented their findings. Leopold spoke with measured authority, his voice carrying across the chamber. Isabel, though seated due to her pain, added her voice with calm determination. "We do not deny our duty," Leopold declared. "But duty must also mean truth. Our dynasty has paid dearly for its obsession with purity of blood. My wife suffers for it. I suffer for it. Too many of our kin have died young, broken, or deformed. If this continues, Spain itself will weaken, not strengthen." Murmurs rippled through the hall. Some faces blanched, others hardened with anger. Isabel's voice cut through the whispers, quiet but clear. "The future does not lie in repeating the mistakes of the past. It lies in new alliances, in new blood. Let our union be the last of its kind. Let our children, if God grants them, inherit not a curse, but a chance." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then the Spanish envoy rose, his face pale. "These words defy centuries of tradition. The king will not welcome them." "Perhaps not," Isabel answered steadily. "But truth does not vanish because it is unwelcome." That night, after the hall emptied, Isabel and Leopold sat together in their chamber. The risk they had taken weighed heavily on them, yet neither spoke of regret. Outside, the city of Brussels lay quiet, its lamps flickering against the dark. Leopold reached for her hand. "We may face exile. We may face wrath. But we spoke the truth. Whatever comes, we face it together. Isabel looked at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. We began as pawns, forced into a game we did not choose. Yet tonight, we were more. We were players. He smiled faintly. And perhaps, history will remember us not for the heirs we failed to produce, but for the courage we dared to show. Isabel leaned against him, her body aching yet her spirit lighter than it had been in years. For once, the weight of her spine seemed less crushing, as though the burden had shifted from her alone to both of them together. The years that followed did not free them from struggle. Madrid's patience waned, whispers of scandal clung to their names, and no heir came to ease the crown's fears. Yet Coudenberg remained a beacon of knowledge, a place where ideas bloomed and where the seeds of modern science quietly took root. Isabel's health declined, her pain unrelenting, but her resolve never wavered. She had chosen to bear not only the weight of her body, but the weight of truth. And in Leopold's steadfast companionship, she found not joy without sorrow, but dignity within sorrow. When history later judged the Habsburgs for their decline, some chroniclers recalled a princess in Brussels who spoke of new blood, who dared to challenge the silence. She had not saved her dynasty, perhaps, but she had sown a warning. And in that warning lay the hope that others, in time, might break free from the curse.